On the August Bank Holiday weekend, I was at the Greenbelt Christian Arts Festival. For 4 nights, I gave up my comfortable bed to sleep in a tent, braving the wind and the rain, living without a shower or hot water, and sharing compost toilets with 12,000 other people. I do it every year and I love it. And you might ask why? Well, one reason is that I can be outside most of the time, which is where I'm happiest. But another reason is that I'm with 12,000 other people serious about connecting their faith and what's happening in our world. I can listen to speakers with wisdom and experience talking about Gaza, Ukraine, refugees, social, racial, gender injustice, the climate and nature emergency. I can meet old friends, make new ones. For me, the gains far outweigh the losses, but many decisions in life involve both loss and gain, and our gospel passage today touches on this in various different ways. The passage begins with a discussion between Jesus and the disciples, where they establish that while most people don't know who he is, the disciples definitely do, and that's precious knowledge gained by being willing to give up their previous lives and follow him. But now Jesus tells them they're about to lose him, a loss which, judging by Peter's reaction, they simply can't face. And then Jesus calls the crowds and talks to them directly about loss and gain. So we'll come back to that passage, but I want to first tell you about Ella Adu Kissy Deborah. Ella was a bright, happy child when in 2013, at the age of 9, she suffered a severe asthma attack and died. She's the first person in the UK to have air pollution on her death certificate as a cause of death. She lived 25 metres away from the South Circular Road in London, and the inquest into her death found that she was exposed to levels of pollution well in excess of World Health Organization guidelines, primarily due to traffic emissions. This little girl's death and the unimaginable loss for her family were not caused by her decision or by a decision they made, but decisions made elsewhere, largely by those in power, who could have done something about what the coroner described as a recognised failure to reduce the level of nitrogen dioxide to within the limits set by the EU and domestic law. Those with power made decisions. Some people may have gained by those decisions, but Ella and her family lost. And while Ella's story may be unusual in the UK, it's certainly not unique if we look across the world. A recent study involving some of the top climate scientists in the world found that an estimated 5.13 million excess deaths per year globally are attributable to air pollution from fossil fuel use, and therefore could potentially be avoided by phasing out fossil fuels. This is getting on for the number of deaths in the whole of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's happening every year. Those with power make decisions, some gain, but millions may lose. Loss of life related to pollution, disappearance of ecosystems and climate change is a feature of the times we live in. To give another contrasting example, in the past 20 years, the UK has lost 78% of its flying insects. That's the number has decreased by 78%. And Andrew Whitehouse of Bug Life, the organisation which showed that decline, says human activities continue to have a huge impact on nature. Society must heed the warning signs of ecological collapse and take urgent action to restore nature. But the impacts aren't only on nature itself, they're also on human health and well-being. In this case, not least because most of the crops that we eat need flying insects to pollinate them. So how do we, or how should we, respond to stories of such devastating loss? So let's go back into Mark chapter 8 and the end of the chapter where Jesus talks about loss and gain, to see what we can learn from that. Jesus begins by talking about people following him and denying themselves and taking up their cross. There's a sense of sacrifice and loss here, but also a call to action, to do something. Crosses don't pick up themselves. Jesus then talks about losing your life in order to save it. Basically, he says that the more we are willing to lose, the more we will gain in the end. But if we try and hold on to what we've currently got, we may in the end lose it. I think there's a painful resonance here with our current context. We are losing so much of our world, and we know that the only way to halt that loss is by giving up some things, like the use of fossil fuels, which previously we might have seen as a gain. However, the world currently seems incapable of giving up those things. What do we stand to lose if it can't manage that in the end? Jesus' next statement, that it does no good to anyone if they gain the whole world but lose their soul, would probably have only seemed relevant to a minority of his listeners, most of whom, like most people today, would have been thinking not about gaining the world, but simply about how to survive from day to day. But what Jesus says to that minority is this: don't do it. Don't try to gain the whole world, because by doing so you may actually lose something infinitely more precious, your soul, the very essence of who you are, someone designed in God's image to love, not to gain the world. Do something, be prepared to lose something, and don't lose your soul. Jesus' instructions for living are relevant in all circumstances, perhaps most especially when we face very difficult situations like our current environmental crises. In the autumn of 2020, 4 black and brown London teenagers did something. They recognised that people of colour and working class communities were most at risk from the health impacts of air pollution, and they formed Choked Up, a campaign to support the communities most affected. Paul Powsland, a UK-based lawyer, was prepared to lose something. He wanted to transfer to the UK some of what he'd learnt about how to protect the land from time he'd spent in Ecuador. Recognising that he would first need to understand the land he wanted to protect, he gave up living in a house and went to live on a houseboat on the River Roding. Dawud Nassar, a Palestinian Christian farmer, and his family have tried to preserve their souls as they struggle to keep the land they own in very difficult circumstances. They have adopted certain values such as don't hate and don't get angry. Interviewed at Greenbelt about his family's situation and what he does when he begins to feel angry, Dawud replied, "I go and plant a tree." It's a hopeful and soul-restoring action. This year, the theme of the season of creation is to hope and act with creation, based on the passage in Romans where Paul talks about the intimate connection between humanity and the rest of creation. Finding out about actions such as those taken by the Choked Up teenagers, by Paul and by Dawud, can help us think about what we might do to hope and act with creation. And if you're interested in thinking more about this, come to the Cathedral on October the 2nd. There's more information about what's happening on the Diocesan Environment web pages, or you can contact me directly to find out. Or talk with others in your church about what you might do or what you might lose, so that together we might hope and act with creation for a better future, more in tune with our souls.